Hi everybody, so we're back with Module 12, Part 2. So this is the second and final part for our Module 12. We are still covering the origin and history of life on Earth, so we'll be continuing with that topic. And our readings here are pages 219 through 239. So 20 pages of reading is what you guys have on your roster for the remainder of this module. So I just want to bring to everybody's attention that I know that Cobra and other Parkland websites have been having technical difficulties. The websites at some point in time have been compromised, probably by some sort of hacker, and so all of the sites or any sites related to Parkland are currently down. We will eventually be notified by IT once those sites are up and running again, and I'll probably also send an email out to you all. Because of this issue that's happening, I have extended deadlines for quizzes and labs, so don't fret. You will be able to turn in your quizzes and labs in a timely manner and still get full credit for those assignments. So just be aware of that. If you guys have any questions and you can still access your Outlook email, please feel free to reach out to me and I can be available through that. But that's about the only place I can reach is the emails. So I can't go on Cobra, I can't do grades right now, I can't do anything, so I'm locked out just like everybody else. Okay, so for our assignments, I just want to let everybody know that I've extended some things just because it took longer to get through some of the parts of our modules, the last two modules here, and then also because of the compromised websites that have been happening. And so I have extended the Module 11 quiz. So right now, as of right now, it's due Thursday, April 30th. It's still your 10 questions, randomly selected, open book, 20 minutes. Same thing with Module 12. So that's also going to be due on Thursday, April 30th, Module 12. So make sure you take both of those quizzes and don't forget to take one of them because if you, we normally only have one at a time, but this particular week, because of the double spring break, we have to combine 2 weeks into one. Also, our stickleback fish virtual lab, that can be extended until Thursday, April 30th as well. If you guys are having issues submitting it through Dropbox, obviously because of the outage that's happening on Cobra, I'll give you guys a few extra days to work on it. So these are the current deadlines as of now. Okay, so our Module 12 reading, the pages are listed here. Today we're going to be covering the third and final section of this chapter, and it's going to be touching on all about the history of life on Earth. So we're going to go through the eons, the eras, the periods, and talk about what's happening at each part of Earth's origin. So ever since Earth became Earth, there have been environmental changes happening over the course of time. A lot of things have changed on Earth's surface, including temperature, atmosphere, all of the land masses, obviously, Pangea. There have been floods and glaciation, so freezing and thawing. We've also had quite a number of volcanic eruptions, which we still have today, and meteorite impacts, some in less severity than in the past, but some still happening even to this day as well. So all of these changes have really shaped how Earth has looked and what life has looked on Earth over time. So we do know that prokaryotic cells arose during the Archean eon. The Archean eon is when all of this microbial life started to flourish in oceans. There was a primordial soup that was happening where there was a lot of stuff for basically these prokaryotes to be able to used for energy. And so this primordial soup in these oceans served as the life source for these things. We do know that the first known fossils occurred approximately 3.5 billion years ago. And the first cells that we did have were prokaryotic, so they did not have a nucleus. And so their DNA was just floating around and not enclosed in a nucleus. So these are just some images here of a fossil prokaryote, which looks a lot like a cyanobacteria, which is what we know of today. So cyanobacteria is actually a form of blue-green algae. It does nitrogen fixation and comes in a variety of forms. And so this is one of our modern prokaryotes that looks a lot like the fossil version. If you look at this image here, you can see the difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. So the cell structure varies depending on what we're looking at here. So if you're looking at the prokaryotes, you can see that there is DNA that is not contained by a nucleus. So all of that DNA is just floating around in the cytoplasm, loose inside of that prokaryote. And on the flip side here, you can see that eukaryote here has a nucleus, and it has DNA that is contained within the nucleus. And it also has a lot more organelles as well. Golgi apparatus, mitochondria, some other organelles that exist, the ribosomes, inside of the eukaryotic cells. Now, some of those do exist in prokaryotic cells, but eukaryotic cells do have more organelles that vary in size, shape, and function as opposed to the prokaryotes. Okay, so we do know that all of the life forms that formed during the Archean eon was prokaryotic. So there was basically hardly any free oxygen floating around for organisms to use. So a lot of these organisms were anaerobic, so they did not require oxygen in order to function. We do know that there was a lot of debate by scientists trying to determine if heterotrophs or autotrophs first appeared. And the conclusion that seems the most reasonable is that heterotrophs were the first to come into existence because they were able to feed off of the primordial soup that occurred in the oceans. And if you recall, heterotrophs use another organism for energy, where autotrophs use photosynthesis for energy. And so scientists have determined that heterotrophs were likely the first types of cells to form, followed by autotrophs, which then were able to use photosynthesis in order to provide their own food source. And so we think that autotrophs formed approximately 2.5 billion years ago as the supply of organic molecules, or the primordial soup full of energy, dwindled over time as heterotrophs used them all of those resources up. So as we continue along through time, we start to see the origin of eukaryotic cells. And this was basically a formation or a union between bacterial and archaeal cells. So we think that eukaryotes evolved somewhere around 1.8 billion years ago. In modern day eukaryotes, we see DNA that's found in the nucleus, and you should remember that from module 3 or so. But you can also find DNA in the mitochondria and the chloroplasts. Now, if you look at properties of modern prokaryotes, you can see there's some differences. So when we look at in the past, or when eukaryotes were first starting to form, there was a nuclear genome that was occurring, which is basically both bacteria and archaea is contributing substantially both to this genome. It's a symbiotic relationship between these two organisms, which is these two types of creatures living together in direct contact and alongside one another. So an endosymbiotic relationship is similar, but instead of living side by side with one another, one of the organisms is living inside of one of the others. So we have some data that supports the endosymbiotic relationship that had occurred between archaea and bacteria. So if you look at this figure, I believe this figure is in your book as well. So it just goes to show, goes on to show how endosymbiotic relationship is happening between archaea and bacteria. So you have an archaea species, and eventually it's going to evolve the ability to enclose a plasma membrane here. And so this plasma membrane eventually leads to the formation of a nuclear envelope. And so after that is happening, it also allows the archaea to engulf a bacteria as well. And then, therefore, is establishing endosymbiosis. So as time continues on, there are a lot of bacteria genes that are being transferred now into the archaea, or into the nucleus. And so this event most likely resulted in mitochondria from being created, or it could have, mitochondria could have arisen from a second endosymbiotic event that happened, or the first one, or depending. But eventually, a subsequent endosymbiotic reaction or event that had happened involves cyanobacteria, which is our blue-green algae type, and then resulting in chloroplasts. And so it's basically the combination of these two types that creates a eukaryotic cell. And so you can see our eukaryotic cells here. We have two different types. We have plants and algae, so that could have been with the cyanobacteria, and then we have the eukaryotic cells with animal fungi and protists, and so that could have involved the bacteria and the archaea. So it could have varied and happened simultaneously. Okay, so let's move on to some of the eons here. So this is our Proterozoic eon, and so this is when we start to see multicellular eukaryotes arising, and this occurs approximately 1.5 billion years ago. And so we think that there are two possible origins. So we have individuals of eukaryotes, of multicellular eukaryotes, forming a colony. But also we could see a single cell dividing that stays stuck together somehow. And so this is how we could have these multicellular eukaryotes being formed. And so an example of what we could see here is our Volvocene green algae. So this is a type of green algae that displays a degree or variations of a degree of multicellularity. So you can see all of them here clustered together. There's also some other types of algae here. Chlamydomonas and also Volvox are just to name a few. And you could find these actually in any sort of freshwater lake. I know when I was up on living up on Lake Erie, we used to do plankton labs, and we would use a seine and kind of use a plankton filter and collect plankton to look at these microinvertebrates under a microscope. So let's continue on to the Proterozoic eon. So basically what we're seeing here too is multicellular animals emerging towards the very end of this eon. And that's happening approximately 600 million years ago. Now the first animals here aren't, your common day dog or cat, obviously. The first animals that we're going to be talking about that occurred approximately 600 million years ago were sponges, polyps, and jellyfish. And so not too complex, but they exist in oceans or any sort of primordial oceanic soup that exists. And so these guys are the first things being formed. So if we continue onwards to the Phanerozoic eon, Now we're going to start seeing a lot of multicellular eukaryotic life, and this is going to be very extensive. And so this is happening approximately 543 million years ago to today. So this eon is a pretty large eon. So this is our Paleozoic era, our Mesozoic era, and our Cenozoic era. Oh, just a quick thing about this image here. They did a really nice job blowing this image up in your book. And so it's kind of hard to see here in this particular photo, but there is a full page version of this era. So you can look at it and use it as a reference for your quizzes to just kind of guide you to let you know what is forming and when. So your Phanerozoic eon goes through your Paleozoic era. And so this is approximately 543 to 248 million years ago. And this includes all of these periods listed here. So your Cambrian period, your Ordovician period, your Silurian period, Devonian, Carboniferous, and Permian. So all of these periods are included. So let's start with the Cambrian period. So this is happening about 543 to 490 million years ago. And what's happening in this particular period is we have what we call a Cambrian explosion, which is all of a sudden you're going to have this prolific increase in diversity of animal species. You're just going to have this explosion of life that's happening. And we don't particularly know what has caused this explosion of life. It could have been a few things. It could have been a shell evolution. It could have been an atmospheric oxygen occurrence. It could have been an arms race, so to speak, where everybody's competing with everybody else and all of a sudden everything's being developed really quickly. And although we do know that there hasn't been any new species that have arisen since, there is no major reorganization of body parts happening. So all of the structural integrity of the organisms being produced from this Cambrian period is pretty much the same. We're not, growing 3 heads or, having whatever. I don't know. I don't even know what sort of body plans would be different than today. Some sort of alien thing. I don't know. But we do know that the first vertebrates were formed approximately 520 million years ago. So this is happening during this Cambrian explosion. This is when your first vertebrates are being formed. So it's more than just sponges, it's more than just jellyfish and polyps. Now we're starting to get into the real cool stuff. So in this particular figure, on the left hand side you can see the Burgess Shale. And so this particular shale has been broken apart where people can go and look for really cool fossils. And in this particular image here is something that you might be able to find if you go to the Burgess Shale here. And then it could be anywhere between some sort of trilobites or some fossilized extinct arthropods, depending on what you're looking for in this particular period. So a lot of cool invertebrates, vertebrates, other stuff that exists that you could potentially find in the shale in the Rockies of Canada. So we also have the Ordovician period. So this is occurring approximately 490 to 443 million years ago. And so what's happening during this period here is we're starting to get warmer temperatures. And the atmosphere is starting to get very wet. And so anything that is starting to develop is becoming more unique here. So now we're starting to get a very diverse marine and macroinvertebrates and regular invertebrates. And these are including your trilobites, your brachiopods, any sort of really cool warm and water-loving creatures. And we're also getting very primitive land plants starting to form. Also arthropods at first, but they're starting to first invade land now. Eventually here towards the end of this period, we're going to have an abrupt climate change event happening where there's going to be some large glaciers forming, and this is going to result in one of the first mass extinctions that we see. And this is going to wipe out essentially 60% of our marine invertebrates, and those are all going to become extinct. So we don't see any more of those anymore. So this is just an image of a stylized version of what you might see if you went back in time and existed in the Ordovician period. You might see some really cool squid creatures, polyps. You have some plants here growing in the ocean. If you walked on land, you might see some very primitive land creatures forming and plants. But most of the life here is still existing in the oceans and in the water. Okay, so let's move on to the Silurian period. So this is happening approximately 443 to 417 million years ago. So now we're getting into some of the creepy crawlies here. At this point in time, our climate has stabilized. So through this period, we have a relatively stable climate. It's not changing very much over these 30 million years or so. Eventually, these glaciers that had formed in the last period here are going to be largely melted, and so we're not going to see any new major invertebrates, but we will see significant new vertebrates and plants. So now we're moving more into vertebrate land here. So we're having whatever invertebrates already existed are staying where they're at in their development or evolution. But we are starting to get some really cool new vertebrates and plants. But we still have all the creepy crawly invertebrates here, types of spiders and centipedes and all that fun stuff that exists in this period. So if you went back in time to the Silurian period, this is what you might see. You might see some sort of lobster creatures. You'll start to see fish. You still have your polyps, your trilobite type, your aquatic plants. Maybe some mollusks are starting to form, snails and mollusks, maybe some anemones as well. You still get jellyfish, but you're starting to get larger fish as well. So this is what you might see. Again, a lot of the life is still existing in the oceans. Not as much on land, but if you went on land, you might still see a few things here or there. But this is just another stylized version of what could exist in this particular period. Okay, so let's move on to the Devonian period. So this is 417 to 354 million years ago. So this Devonian period is what we know as the age of the fishes. So now we're starting to get tetrapods and amphibians emerging. So we're starting to get our, salamander or frog types. And we're also seeing a lot of gymnosperms being developed at this point in time too. And these are our ferns and horsetails and seed plants. You might start seeing evergreens and those types of plants starting to emerge. But now you're also seeing insects as well. So not only are you seeing amphibians starting to come into existence, but insects moving to Earth's land, and then they're also still existing in the water. But you're getting more plants for insects to hide in and live on and forage in. So now stuff is starting to really get moving here. You can see that in this particular image, we have a lot of different types of fish that are being formed as well, or evolving over time, as it is known as the Age of Fishes. So if you went back in time, this is a computer-generated image and a drawing of what you might find if you went back into the Devonian era or period here. So you might see some, looks like large aquatic amphibians such as hellbenders, if you're familiar with those, but also maybe some sort of amphibious lizard type that live in water and out of water at the same time. But you can also see that there's a lot more plants being formed, a lot of gymnosperm, seed-bearing plants, a lot of ferns. So when you go back in time, a lot of times you think of ferns as being the main style of plants. This is where they're first starting to be formed in the Devonian. So as time continues to move forward, now we're moving into the Carboniferous period. So this is happening between 354 to 290 million years ago. This is the period where we start to see coal deposits being placed or being formed. So eventually all of this coal that we dig up is coming from the Carboniferous period. So we have a lot of cooler temperatures, and we have land that's being covered by forested areas and a lot of swampy, marshy type habitat. And so now we have plants and animals being further diversified. So stuff is changing even more rapidly. Now you also have very large plants and trees being prevalent. Stuff is growing larger, bigger. And we also now see the development of flying insects. So wings are starting to be formed. And we already knew that amphibians were formed, but now they are extraordinarily prevalent. But along with those being formed in existence here, we have amniotic eggs being emerging. And these are found in reptiles. So reptiles who lay eggs here, these amniotic eggs, are able to lay an egg, have it incubate outside of their body, and be hatched dependent on whatever temperature it's existing in, and then able to go forth and live a separate life. Also in the Carboniferous period, if you went back in time here, you might see something that looks like this. The Carboniferous period did end because of global cooling that happened, because the oxygen levels were only around 35%. There was a massive die-off that also happened and led to the formation of fossil fuels. So not only are you getting a lot of coal, you're getting other fossil fuels as well, but those are all being formed in the Carboniferous period. So if you're mining coal or getting gasoline or oil deposits, that is primarily being formed from the Carboniferous period. The next period here is the Permian period. So this Permian period is existing between 290 to 248 million years ago. So this is happening when the continental drift is being formed by the supercontinent that we all know of from last module as Pangaea. The forest is shifting to gymnosperms. I think I may have misspoke on the last slide. We had angiosperms being formed. Now we have gymnosperms being formed. But also now we have amphibians that are very prevalent, but now reptiles are becoming the dominant type of species. So even though amphibians are still there, we still have our salamanders, our frogs, our hellbenders, or whatever exists back then. Now we're seeing a predominance of reptiles, lizards, snakes, dinosaurs, but we also have our first mammal make its appearance at this time period. And so this is where we have our first mammal being evolved. So we have mammal-like reptiles that are in existence here, but we also have that look very similar to dinosaurs, but they are very mammal-like also. Very unique in this particular period because they are mammal-like, but they are reptiles. Also in the Permian period, at the end of the Permian period, we have the largest known mass extinction event that has happened. So we know that we already had the very first extinction event, but this is the largest. And this is where we have between 90 and 95 of all of the marine species in existence, and a large proportion of the terrestrial species being eliminated. And scientists aren't necessarily sure here what has caused it, and this is happening between, if you can see my mouse here, between this light blue area and this dark blue area here. This is where that big mass extinction is happening. But this is happening primarily due to either a glaciation or a volcanic eruption. At least that's what scientists blame this particular mass extinction on, but it could have been a few other things, but we're not completely sure, but evidence points to those two possibilities. So moving on to the Mesozoic era, this particular area is being marked here by this Permian extinction that had happened. So that extinction, remember that we just talked about on the last slide, that is marking the boundary here that you can see my mouse pointing to. It's marking the boundary between the Paleozoic and the Mesozoic era here. And this is what we know as the age of the dinosaurs. This temperature here in the Mesozoic era is very hot, consistently hot. The climate itself is very dry, and there are a lot of terrestrial or land-based environments, and there's very little, if any, ice at the poles. And so those don't typically exist because the Earth right now at this point in time is so warm, dry, and hot. So we have in this particular era here in the Mesozoic, the first period that we have in formation is the Triassic period. And so this is happening between 248 to 206 million years ago. And so this is a period when reptiles are plentiful. We have a lot of reptiles, think dinosaurs. And so this is when we have the very first dinosaurs being formed, right? The first true mammals are also emerging at this point in time. So we know we had the first mammal already make its appearance, but these are true mammals instead of mammal-like reptiles. And for the dominant land plants, these are our evergreens. So a lot of your coniferous evergreen trees that you might see. Now, also during this period, we did have a volcanic eruption. And these particular eruptions have led to global warming and mass extinctions at the very end of the Triassic period. So we have more mass extinctions happening due to the volatile nature of the volcanic eruptions that are happening. So when we think of the Triassic period, we see a lot of dinosaurs here. So instead of Jurassic Park, it would have probably been better to name that movie Triassic Park, but probably Jurassic Park sounded better. But this is what you might see. You might see a lot of different species of dinosaurs here. We're not sure if they exactly looked quite like this due to not having any living dinosaurs left on Earth and only working off of their fossils. But as we continue onward, dinosaurs may have been notably known to have feathers, but we'll get into that here soon. In the Jurassic period. So this is what you may have seen if they correctly did the movie. More feathered dinosaurs. We don't have any feathered dinosaurs in that particular movie, but this did occur between 206 and 144 million years ago. So now we have our gymnosperms continuing to be the dominant type of plant here. We also have dinosaurs as our dominant land animal. Some even grew to a gigantic size, so we have very, very large dinosaurs at this point in time as well. We also have our first known bird, which is likely more of a cross between a reptile and a bird. And although we did already have the emergence of our true mammals, they are present but not prevalent, which means that that is not the dominant terrestrial species roaming Earth's surface at this point in time. So if you were to explore through the Jurassic period as a human, you might see a lot of very large dinosaurs that were in existence, but you also probably saw a lot more birds, a lot more feathered dinosaurs, probably very colorful dinosaurs at this point in time too, but a whole myriad of unique reptilian species at least. Okay, so in the Phanerozoic eon, we also have within that the Mesozoic era, and we're going to be talking about the Cretaceous period here. So that happened around 144 to 65 million years ago. And at this point, we also have dinosaurs still being the dominant species on Earth. We also are now getting the earliest flowering plants, the angiosperms. And so after that is happening, we have another mass extinction. So this is happening at the very end of this particular Cretaceous period. And this is where we know that there were a lot of dinosaurs and a lot of other species wiped out. So likely the theory is that there was a large meteor or asteroid or some sort of volcanic eruption that has been blamed for this particular extinction that wiped out all of these species due to blocking out the sun. The plants weren't able to grow, and therefore there was no food source for a lot of the dinosaurs that ate the plants, the vegetarian dinosaurs. I don't even know what word I'm looking for. The omnivores and the carnivores. So everybody's food source essentially got wiped out. Okay, in the Phanerozoic era, we also have the Cenozoic era. Or, I'm sorry, Phanerozoic eon, we have the Cenozoic era. So this spans the most recent time period all the way to 65 million years ago. So this is our most recent one here. This is where we have tropical conditions occurring, and then they're replaced by a colder and more dry climate. And this is called our age of the mammals. So this is where we start seeing a lot of mammals being formed or evolving. And we're having a lot of diversification happening. So you're having so many different unique species of insect and bird and plant and fish and mammal occurring. And so you're really starting to get a very diverse plethora of species. Okay, now you're going to get into, we're still in the Phanerozoic eon, we're still in the Cenozoic era. Now we're getting into the Tertiary period. So this is 65 to 1.8 million years ago. And so this is happening when mammals here that have survived the last mass extinction now are breeding and proliferating and expanding out rapidly. And so you're also seeing birds and terrestrial insects or land insects being diversified. So many different species coming out of those original species and evolving. Angiosperms, or our flowering plants, are the dominant land plant now at this point in time. And you're also seeing in water sources, fresh or salt water here, that fish are becoming diversified and sharks are becoming abundant. So you're getting very large style of fish. At this point in time, you're also seeing whales. Now, whales are mammals, right? So now you're seeing mammals occurring in oceans. And so we have mammals that have made their way into the waters of the world. Now we're also starting to see hominids appearing, and this is approximately 7 million years ago. So our very, very, very first ancestors are starting to occur in this tertiary period that will eventually become us. Okay, so we're still in our Phanerozoic eon, we're still in our Cenozoic era. Now we're in our Quaternary period. So the Quaternary period is the one that we know here. So this is 1.8 million years ago all the way to the present time. And so this is a period that has ice ages that occur in ebbs and flows that cover much of Europe and North America. But we're also seeing a lot of extinction happening, widespread extinction happening of a lot of different species. And this is for a lot of different reasons. This is for ice age purposes, and this is also because of the hominids that are starting to become more human-like and starting to cause some of these particular extinctions. Our Homo sapiens that have appeared approximately 130,000 years ago are the resulting cause of a lot of these extinctions as well. So you know that potentially have caused the woolly mammoth extinction and several other species as well. So this is my last slide here today. So we ended on the present time in our Quaternary period, so that's what we're in right now. We likely won't live to see the occurrence of another period because they last several million years typically. But this particular period is unique because we have such a diverse landscape and so many diverse species at this point in time. Okay, so that's all I have for you guys today. So be sure to follow up with me if you have any questions, and make sure you guys take your quiz. And please do the readings because it contains a lot more information than I was able to squeeze into the second part of Module 12. And so those readings can really help prepare you for the Module 12 quiz. All right, guys, I will talk to you soon during next lecture.